All right, so our questions with Joe.
How has the offensive install been going so far this spring? And what's kind of stood out to you about the personnel you have available here at Utah?
Yeah, I think the install is going pretty well. We had some opportunities for some meetings prior to spring. With our time allotment available, and we were able to go through a few things on the field within the restrictions. So we were able to meet about a lot of things, talk about a lot of things, give them some exposure. We're seeing it in practice for the first time. So, we set it up so there's an install day, then a review day. So through practice 4, it was 2 installs with 2 reviews. Still a lot of details, a lot of things we have to clean up, which is normal. It's not frustrating. Just got to have a growth mindset and got to take it with a grain of salt with, trying to create the chemistry with putting all 11 pieces together. But but I think there are some really good elements to, personnel wise to this offense, some things that we're tinkering with right now, trying to find roles to, see what situations we can put guys in and who we can use and create packages around, things like that. And so, but I'm excited about some of those parts.
I'm going to bring in Bryson just for a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, Bryson was a dual threat quarterback, very experienced in both passing and running. You have 2 quarterbacks that are good at both of those things. I'm curious, just, with your offense, what are you looking for from Devin and from Bird and kind of piggybacking off of that? How different is this offense from maybe what they experienced last year?
Yeah, obviously, with Bryson, we tried to utilize his whole skill set. I think a big part of what we went through with him was developing him as a passer, but probably most importantly, developing him as a decision maker. You go back and watch it. Everybody knows how athletic Devin and Bird are, and I know that that's something that we'll be able to lean on. That's not a secret with their athleticism, that you can utilize that. They can get you out of certain situations. It's always nice as a play caller, but developing the total quarterback, and I think the biggest thing with their development, probably with the system and schematics of the system, is just developing their decision making, developing their processes, reads that, a guy going from, maybe where he's got an object receiver, it's like throw to this guy, and then all of a sudden you're going through a full field progression with certain concepts just because of what the system requires you to do, and have been really surprised with how well they picked that up, how fast, doing some really good things out there that are atypical for a 4th spring practice. So.
For years, Utah's used the run to establish everything it does when it's the offense. When you came in here, what was that conversation like with Scally? And what's your philosophy in coming together? Does he give you more leeway because you are the offensive guy to have the expertise and he doesn't? Or how does that all work together in building an offensive philosophy for this Utah team?
I think that, the biggest directives from Coach Scally, I think first and foremost is there's been a culture established on defense that Coach Scally's established. You go back to the RSNB with the defense, and making that a whole team culture. So that's something that we're really trying to dive into, how we play, what that culture is as a team, and to establish that same type of toughness, that same type of relentlessness on the offensive side of the ball. And, outside of that, at this point, it hasn't really given me too many directives, outside of, who are your personnel, utilizing them the proper way. I think an important component of what it's been in the past is the ability to play complementary football. And, regardless of what it's looked like from year to year, my understanding of what this place is, what we've been able to lean on to be able to win football games, to win complementary football, things like that are, I'm well aware of those things, but that's never been a directive from Coach. Just more how we play and getting the best usage out of our personnel, and then like I say, just how can we best play complementary football to win football games.
So it's the old cliche that games are won in the trenches. You've got an interesting offensive line unit in the sense that you've got the 5-star freshman, you've got the transfer that's got a lot of experience, but he's coming up from the FCS level, and then you've got a group of guys that have been in the program for a while and lots of snaps, especially last year, given how they were backups, but maybe not a lot of starts between them. So what are you looking for from that offensive line? What's it going to take for guys to separate themselves and get into that starting five or the 10 deep rotation or whatever that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I have to compliment Coach Gross and the job that he's doing with those guys. I've been very pleasantly surprised with the group. I was probably just as skeptical as you guys were coming in with yes, there were some starts, yes, there were some experience, but kind of spotty. Collectively as a group, no starts together. I think there's chemistry built there when you finalize that group and they start to play together, and there's that communication, there's that camaraderie that comes with it. I think we're ahead of schedule as far as those things go. Coach Gross is a technician, and I see those guys working on their craft every day. I see the room becoming closer, bonding. I'm seeing leadership come out of that room. So well ahead of schedule. We got to decide on who the best five are. That's going to be some mixing and matching. Sometimes that can take away from building the chemistry early on that you may want, but I think we can be very successful with that group with the ability that I'm seeing athletically, with the mindset that they're bringing every day, that's being instilled into them. I think we're going to be in great shape there. So.
Coach, going back to the quarterback position, we talk so much about what the players need to learn with your system. How much of this process is you learning what they do well and where their areas of improvement are?
Yeah, I would say extremely important. Just as every place that I've been has been different, and part of that process is like with here last year, and I've said it before, they were very successful offensively here with a certain philosophy, and obviously leaning on the run game, like was brought up, and something that they were masterful with. Score 40 points a game, and you're moving the ball up and down the field. So, I would be remiss if I wasn't studying last year's offense, and especially the guys that were involved in it and what they knew. Being able to implement those things with what we're doing systematically, and then for me it's like, okay, what are the best components of that we can implement? How can we build on it? And then figuring out how those pieces, those players fit. But there are some guys coming back that did some things in that system with some of the backs, with Wayshawn, with the way they use Daniel Bray. He's one I would love to be able to expand his role, see what he can do, because he's a really dynamic player. We talked about the quarterbacks with their involvement in the offense, but what that looks like, because I think, it's not really expanding their role, but it's kind of what you're asking them to do within the system. And, and so it's like, how much more can we put on their plate? And that really boils down to how well they can make the decisions with it. And, expanding the pass game more so, or even expanding some schemes in the run game, or whether it be RPO schemes that they're not used to, even though they might be used to running something. There's a lot of different components of it, but I think the personnel surrounding those quarterbacks, the usage of those guys and the personnel surrounding them and the roles you put there. I mean, we got those two rhinos in there that I'm like, okay, I haven't really played with the rhino, but these guys are really cool. I just know that they're in there and they're knocking people around, and so I've used a fullback in the past, but last year at Utah State, a lot of 2-back and 3-back, but they were backs with different skill sets, and so whether you call them a tight end or a fullback, but how do you utilize those guys to the fullest extent? It's a good problem to have. It's fun, but early in the process of trying to put that all together.
It's rare in the advent of the portal that you have two quarterbacks that are starting caliber, but they went through a lot of changes offseason. I mean, they lost their quarterback coach, their offensive coordinator. In your shoes, when you're coming in, I'm sure you had to kind of put on your salesman hat. Just what were the conversations like with Bird and with Devin in that process of kind of the chaos of it all? Just, here's my system, here's why I want you guys to stay. What did that all look like from your perspective?
I think a biggest thing is I think guys like that are going to want to see somewhat of a track record, whether it's being able to have some success somewhere offensively, guys that you've developed. I think there's relationships that you make that where they're hearing from people and that had experience with myself or with Coach Gunderson. I think it's I think a big thing with Devin was selling the development, and this is what had guys do. These are similar players to you and what they've been able to accomplish. You know, it's a goal of his to go to the NFL, and so it's okay. You know, how do we need to develop you to get you to the next level? You know, we need to get you more in tune with protection. We need to get you more in tune with certain types of reads, with certain types of concepts, so that you become more of a complete player. I think with Bird, it's, you know, utilization. You know, how can you contribute, and what does that look like? You know, he's like a Swiss Army knife, and you know, without giving up the ship, you know, there's a lot of different things that he can do on a play-to-play basis, and different places that he can line up, and you know, we need to be able to utilize those and get creative with those packages.
You bring Braden Pagan with you from Utah State to Utah. Just speak to the importance of having him, you know, help bring the other guys along, whether it is in the wide receiver room, the running backs, quarterbacks, wherever it is, and just what does he, you know, add to this offense?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the experience with the system and some of the schemes. I think being a second year in that, they're, you know, doing things a little bit faster, you know, a little bit more confident with what you're doing, and I think that's important for Braden especially when you're going up a level. You know, because I think if he was where he was at last year with what he's competing against at this level, you want to have some confidence in what you're doing, and so you know, he's been able to be out there practicing at a high level because he's confident in the system. And then I think this early on, I think part of him being voted a leader on our team was the fact that he's been able to bring guys along. You know, he can sit in the receiver room and he can coach those guys up on what certain things need to look like and what this concept means. Okay, well, this is what Coach McGiven wants on this concept, and so it's been extremely valuable for the room. But then also the experience in the system, I think, valuable in his confidence and the speed that he's playing with right now.
Thank you, Coach.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you.